Ben, isn't it so nice here on the French Riviera where we've been taking our podcasting intermission summer break?
Yeah, we've been sitting on the cafes. We've been idly sipping our espresso. We've been seeing the bohemians flitter back and forth like so many gilded butterflies.
Welcome, listener. Welcome back to the Infinite Library. You might have noticed this episode is one that we promised was coming a long time ago, but due to some unforeseen cursed circumstances,
including storms, curses,
literal acts of God,
acts of God,
a marriage, a historic thunderstorm passing through the great town of Bloomington, Indiana.
Which shook the trees to their foundations. So.
Yeah, and the general shoddiness of American infrastructure. This episode has been a long time coming, and it's finally here.
It's finally here. Guys, we're quite happy about it.
Yes, you guys are about to get to listen to our conversation with the master himself, Dr. Phil Ford of the Weird Studies podcast, where we talk about what was the book, Ben? It's been a minute.
Right Ho Jeeves by P.G. Wodehouse.
Yes. So we just kind of wanted to record a little intro to kind of let you guys know what's going on with the show before we get into the ep. So we have our next season coming here soon. We're actually going to be trying something new for the show. We're going to be doing a deep dive on a particular author to kind of get things started and kind of explore some new space for the show. And we're going to be reading all the works of Michael Chabon in chronological order.
And Michael Chabon, I think, feels like a great fit for this podcast because I think him and of his cohort were really interested in mixing genre fiction with literary fiction. And that's something I think that we return to time and again in this podcast, and which we kind of talk about a little bit in this episode even. And so I think it'll be great to kind of just really look at his stuff and sort of see what we can learn from what he does and the various books that we've read of his or the ones that we haven't read.
Yeah. So Chabon's definitely someone we've talked about on the show before, and I think that we're going to have a lot of fun discussing his works. We got some other episodes where we're going to kind of stick to our bi-weekly schedule, but we're going to be mixing up those kind of chronological episodes with kind of our more standard fare episodes here in the coming weeks and months. So look forward to that. Ben, is there anything you want to say about P.G. Wodehouse, Right Ho Jeeves? Anything the listeners are going to be hearing here in the next couple minutes?
Phil, we're really glad that Phil took some time out of his schedule because he's a busy man to chat with us, because Weird Studies is really important to us. And I think the conversation is pretty great. And I think Phil does a great job of kind of explaining some of the interesting forms that P.G. Wodehouse uses, from like Fred Astaire musicals to kind of like expectations of like what well-read English literature. What does it mean to be well-read in English literature? So I think it's a great episode, and I'm glad it finally came out despite, as John alluded to, numerous acts of God.
I agree, Ben. I think that this was an episode that when Phil came to us with the suggestion of a title, when we reached out to him and asked about what we were going to talk about, we kind of gave him his druthers to decide what he wanted to come on and do. We were a little unsure of, a pretty slim text and one that I mean, we love Wodehouse, but we weren't sure if it was going to have enough meat on the bone, so to speak. But we had a really fun time talking about this. And I think that this is actually a really great show, as Ben and I have been kind of thinking about, what is the Infinite Library about? So I hope you enjoy this episode. Roll that beautiful Phil footage.
As always, please give us a follow on Twitter at iLibraryPod, as well as on YouTube, where we are the Infinite Library Podcast. And also, please give us a follow on wherever you listen to your podcasts. We, put them all out there, so you can find us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And we'd love to hear from you. So give us a shout out if you're so inclined.
Welcome, everyone, to the Infinite Library. This is your host, John, wearing my fine white podcasting jacket, joined today by my co-host, Ben, and a very special guest. We have Mr., or should I say Professor, Phil Ford of the Weird Studies podcast here to talk with us about P.G. Wodehouse and Right Ho Jeeves. Phil, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. That white mess jacket you're wearing is most becoming. Never mind what people say about it making you look like a waiter.
I'm a little embarrassed because I see you're wearing the same white mess jacket, and in fact, Ben is too.
I know. I was assured that this was the dernier cri of fashion in 2024.
Yeah,
Bertie Wooster himself told me.
Did you have your Ouija board out with you, or is he
always
the ripe old age of? Would he be maybe like 120 at this point?
He is deathless.
That's true. That's true. He lives on forever, as does the inestimable Jeeves.
Indeed.
Yeah, I like the idea that he exists in sort of that like eternal kind of like always having fun, getting into like romantic adventures, but like nothing exactly disturbs whatever balance he has in terms of like what things he needs to do and like how successful he is at like fixing a relationship or something like that.
I have often thought that the Jeeves and Wooster books are an excellent depiction of like what living in like a Deva realm in Buddhism must be like.
Like sort of timeless,
like just enough conflict to like keep you invested in like the comings and goings of samsara, but ultimately always like pleasant.
Yes, very much like the world of, like Astaire Rogers' RKO musicals from the 1930s. I often like to say that if what I'm hoping for, cosmologically speaking, is that there is a heaven, and it's one of those deals where you can choose which heaven you go to, because I've already got my answer. It's going to be the world of the Astaire Rogers RKO pictures from the 30s, a world of frictionless friction. Like it always ends up fine. All the complications are amusing. Everything in this world is elegant and beautiful and charming. There's never any lack of anything. There's always delightful, amusing, and eccentric people to do fun things with and get in adventures with. Who wouldn't want that? And the world of Jeeves and Wooster is exactly the same heaven. It's cut from the same cloth.
I completely agree with you, Phil. I think that that's something I really admire about Wodehouse as a writer is, like you said, frictionless friction. It would be very easy, and I think there are tons of examples of this throughout literature and other media where the reason a comedy doesn't work is because there's no tension, no friction whatsoever. But he finds just the right level of conflict to keep you invested in the story and to really get those jokes going without leaving a lot of room for like actually getting like dark or inviting kind of a more frightening reading.
Yeah, and I think it's too like even also on the level of the language where like the friction is like people sort of misunderstanding each other, and it's always very funny. Like there's a specific example in this story where one of the characters that like comes to Bertie for romantic advice is like sort of a nerd, and he really loves newts. And there's a scene where they like keep missing each other that I pulled out on like the level of like why they're talking about newts. And so the specific thing is basically, Wooster says, but you aren't a male newt. And then this character goes, Gussie Finknottle says, I wish I were. Do you know how a male newt proposes, Bertie? He just stands in front of the female newt, vibrating his tail and bending his body in a semicircle. I could do that on my head. No, you wouldn't find me grousing if I were a male newt. But you were a male newt. Madeline Bassett wouldn't look at you. Not with the eye of love, I mean. She would if she were a female newt. But she isn't a female newt. No, but suppose she was. Well, if she was, you wouldn't be in love with her. Yes, I would if I were a male male nudes. So like there's like friction on the level of the language, which produces the humor as well as the plots that we're talking about. And it's sort of like all the way down in terms of like, frictionless friction.
And also sort of conversely, you can have moments that in real life might be frightening or at least off-putting. For example, Tuppy Glossop in a towering rage because he thinks that Gussie Fink Noddle has usurped his place in the heart of his beloved. What is the name of his, not Madeline Bassett, but what's the name of the woman that Angela,
yes,
right,
Angela
yes.
Travers.
And so he's convinced that Gussie Fink Noddle has taken Angela away from him, and so he's in a towering rage and running all over this stately house where they're all staying for the weekend, trying to assault Gussie. And there's this moment where Tuppy turns up and says, "Oh, well, have you seen him?" Meaning Gussie. "No." "Well, if you do, say goodbye to him quickly and put in your order for lilies." "Oh, Jeeves, sir." And then Jeeves, in his inimitable way, has just somehow materialized, and Wooster pauses to ponder just how mysterious that always is. "Have you seen Mr. Fink Noddle, Jeeves?" "No, sir." "I'm going to murder him." "Very good, sir." Tuppy withdrew, banging the door behind him. And, it's even moments of high conflict don't really matter in some large sense. And Jeeves, imperturbable, "Very good, sir," is in fact exactly the appropriate thing to say in a moment where somebody is expressing an intent to kill.
Yeah, "very good, sir," and then "indeed, sir," which is later expressed as having multiple kinds of valences depending on like how Jeeves is saying "indeed, sir."
And that is actually part of the humor, is the way that Jeeves, usually quite minimalistic utterances, mostly "very good, sir," or "indeed, sir," displaying the old feudal spirit, as Wooster likes to say, that the humor coming from the enormous amount of implication packed in these minimal phrases. The passage that you were just referring to, where Jeeves and Wooster have been having a bit of a disagreement about about the mess jacket, and as a result of that, now Wooster is giving Jeeves a hard time about his plans. Everybody goes to Jeeves with their romantic troubles, and Jeeves always has a plan that will put things right. And Wooster is complaining that Jeeves' plans are a little elaborate. You need to be, have simpler, sturdier ideas like mine. And of course, that's funny because Wooster's ideas are invariably terrible. And so this is this is on page 75 of the Penguin edition. I don't know which one you have. Wooster says, "On the present occasion I shall not fail, and I'll tell you why I shall not fail, because my scheme is rooted in human nature." "Indeed, sir." "It is simple, not elaborate, and furthermore based on the psychology of the individual." "Indeed, sir." "Jeeves," I said, "don't keep saying 'indeed, sir.' No doubt nothing is further from your mind than to convey such a suggestion, but you have a way of stressing the 'in' and then coming down with a thud on the 'deed,' which makes it virtually tantamount to 'oh yeah? Correct this, Jeeves.'" And as much of a fathead as Wooster is, he's actually quite right about that.
Absolutely.
And it's a little meta moment where Wodehouse tips his hand a little bit just to give you a sense of like, this is one way that the trick is done. The humor that comes from the amount of implication packed in these minimal utterances.
Also, like, there's not a lot of, like, I guess we would expect, like, descriptive dialogue there. You sort of have to read it the way that Wodehouse is suggesting that it be read, rather than being told, like, there's no, like, descriptive adverbs or something like that. It's like sort of just in you deducing how it would sound if Jeeves was saying it and not meaning it, or whatever he was meaning exactly. So
it's beautifully stripped down writing, and everything has a function, and the function is always the joke and getting you to the joke.
Yeah.
And so description, when it exists at all, exists only in service of a joke. I actually have a good example of this. This is later in the story where Wooster has been given the job to kind of soften up Madeline Bassett so that Gussie Fink-Nottle can approach her, because Fink-Nottle is so nervous that he can't, whenever he tries to talk to Madeline Bassett, who he's in love with, he starts prattling on about newts and he blows the moment. And so Wooster is going to try to soften up Bassett. And of course, she gets the wrong idea and thinks that Wooster, is trying to express love, which is the furthest thing from Wooster's mind, because he thinks that Bassett is an intolerably soppy, treacly, saccharine kind of person who's apt to say that the stars are God's daisy chain and that sort of thing. And so he's describing the park and the stately home where they're vacationing, and he's describing the evening where he's coming upon her. And this is one of the few moments of description, but again, the description exists entirely in service of the gag, which comes at the end. He writes, with the Bassett, something less snappy and a good deal more glutinous was obviously indicated. In other words, okay, I got to say sort of sentimental things here, right? What with all this daylight saving stuff, we had hit the great open spaces at a moment when twilight had not yet begun to cheese it in favor of the shades of night. There was a fag end of sunset still functioning. Stars were beginning to peep out. Bats were fooling around. The garden was full of the aroma of those niffy white flowers which only start to put in their heavy work at the end of the day. In short, the glimmering landscape was fading on the sight, and all the air held a solemn stillness, and it was plain that this was having the worst effect on her. Her eyes were enlarged, and her whole map a good deal too suggestive of the soul's awakening for comfort. That made me laugh.
Especially too that at the end, the punchline, her aspect was that of a girl who was expecting something fairly fruity from Bertram. so yeah, there's that like enlargement and then just immediately undercutting it with like the joke too. Like yeah.
And also typical Wodehouse stuff that he is it's a tissue of slang of the time, slang of about a century ago. Niffy white flowers putting in their heavy work at the end of the day, etc. But sprinkled with words and phrases drawn from a really broad acquaintance with English literature, and more generally a kind of educated culture of, again, about a century ago. So the soul's awakening, for example, being an expression one would find in a lot of sentimental Victorian culture. That would be a figure for a painter, or like an illustration in a book, the soul's awakening, and you might find an illustration of somebody's face with some supposedly spiritual aspect upon it. And Wooster's head is pretty empty, but it's also been stuffed, it would seem, with words and phrases from a wide acquaintance with literature and culture of the times. And for people who find that sort of thing funny, it's something that makes a passage like this extra funny.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, as far as I know, all the Jeeves and Wooster stories are written essentially from Wooster's first person perspective.
Yeah, all but a couple.
Yeah, and so we spend basically all our time directly in his head, and it's funny the way that Wodehouse uses that perspective to give us just enough of an idea that, like, maybe there is something a little more to Wooster. Maybe he is a little smarter than he lets on, just so that he can immediately then undercut it and show us that, no, this man is every bit the fool that you think he is. He makes a great deal of his scripture learning prize that he got back in his school days.
Yes.
Which really just gives you the idea that this is a man who has the brain of a magpie. Like you said, Phil, he's picked up all these things. Does he have any deeper understanding of them? Probably not.
Yeah, and if anything, like they're sort of also used as, like you were saying, like kind of a lead into somebody who might know about them, like all of the like Sherlock Holmes references, which I found to be like extremely funny. Like one I just picked out was one can't give the raspberry to a client. I mean, you didn't find Sherlock Holmes refusing to see clients just because he had been out late the night before at Dr. Watson's birthday party, which is more or less like describing him being hungover and like I guess I'll see this guy who needs my help. And so that's kind of like we would expect this kind of, but also like he's read them, I guess we would think. And so he also sort of is viewing the situation in terms of like, oh, it's like a detective thing, except like that's the thing. Like Jeeves would clearly be Sherlock Holmes because he's way smarter. But I think like Bertie fancies himself as kind of a Sherlock Holmes, so he's not going to say like I'm the Watson, basically. So, but yeah, there's like something there in terms of like this like wealth of references that both Bertie and I think the reader would know.
Well, the reference to Sherlock Holmes is really apt, I think. I partly because I've recently reread the whole Holmes canon, which I do every few years. I'm passionately fond of the.
I'm trying to get John on that tip stories. Also. I don't know if John started reading them yet, but we were talking about it.
Then I'll read the full Holmes canon if I can get you to read Conan the Barbarian. Okay,
fair deal. Yeah, I'll accept that.
That's the kind of deal where everybody wins.
Exactly.
But Sherlock Holmes suggests itself as a parallel to Wooster and Jeeves, partly because there are textual references sprinkled throughout these stories that link it to the Holmes canon. For example, one passage that I find amusing, where Wooster is boasting to Jeeves that he's got the Glossop situation all sorted out, and Jeeves, as usual, responds with an arched eyebrow. Indeed, sir. Might I inquire? And the response from Wooster is, "You know my methods, Jeeves. Apply them," which is a line from Holmes. But it's not only, and that's funny because it's also a little bit like, this simpleton who is topping it, the masters. Like he's affecting an attitude of superiority to somebody who really is his intellectual superior. And that's funny. But quite apart from that, there's also the kind of the structural parallel where you have the second banana relationship. You have these two. Actually, second banana isn't really quite the right expression. You have they're a duo act, and Holmes is, as Holmes tells us, he's nothing without his Boswell. He's lost without Watson. Holmes doesn't need Watson to figure stuff out, but in some larger sense, certainly for the reader, he needs Watson.
Yeah.
The Holmes story is incomplete without Watson. There are one or two Holmes stories that are told from Holmes' point of view, and they just aren't that great. And it's kind of the same thing. And there's a similar kind of symbiosis between Jeeves and Wooster, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. And then also there's the matter of genre fiction that Holmes and Watson, those stories make their effect through an elegant application of genre logic. They securely inhabit their own genre, and their effects are dependent upon the reader's understanding of the genre. Like, for example, that at the beginning of a Holmes story, you're typically going to have some minor feat of deduction. Somebody leaves their hat behind in Holmes's consulting room, and Holmes will say to Watson, "What do you make of that hat? What do you think that hat can tell us about its owner?" And Watson makes a few feeble deductions, and Holmes then blinds us with his brilliance as he figures out all these things from just this simple, homely article that's been left behind. That's a kind of savoir-faire. That's something you see in many, many stories. It's not invariable, but it's really common. And so part of your satisfaction in reading a Holmes story is going to be seeing that moment hove into view. And then, the elegance of it is, well, how are we going to handle it this time? It's a little bit like the satisfaction of watching a James Bond movie and really enjoying it when Bond says that he wants his cocktail shaken, not stirred. We've heard it a million times before, but the fulfillment of the generic expectation is deeply satisfying. And
or
Worcester and Jeeves that do the same kind of thing.
Dispatching somebody and then having like a quippy one-liner. Like I don't remember which one, but like there's one where Pierce Bronson like throws some guy into a printing press, and then like you see blood on the paper, and he goes, "Amazing what they print in the news these days." Like, and then just like walks off. And I think like seeing kind of like a scene play out so that like Worcester makes a mistake or Jeeves fixes it is kind of similar in terms of like what's the cap on the end of the scene, kind of, or something like that.
Yeah.
Also, I wanted to mention the psychology line's interesting. So in this, Wooster frequently mentions that he's like thinking about psychology, which is a thing that Jeeves has talked about, and he doesn't really understand it. And one thing I think we had mentioned in this sort of version of this conversation that got cut short due to mysterious circumstances was that like a lot of the Fred Astaire like musical sources for this stuff, characters are more types than like rounded psychologies. Yes. And I think there's like an very interesting true. Like sort of, I don't know if it's a commentary or rather like a kind of like Worcester is like thinking about psychology, but since he's kind of a type, he doesn't really understand it. And like Jeeves understands it enough so that he can fix the plot, but not sort of present himself as like this rounded character or like these other rounded characters that would like stick out from like the types that are like in this story.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. That's part of the appeal, and I think maybe for some people a challenge of genre fiction. You know, some people whose literary preferences run to kind of realistic modern fiction, a somewhat higher brow than, you know, genre fiction, and genre fiction being considered from that point of view sort of a literary ghetto. One of the things that people complain about, like somebody who's all about, you know, modern literary fiction, they read a science fiction or fantasy story, they're going to be like, you know, I don't care about like the world. I don't care about the amazing sword that the hero gets, or I don't care about the quest. I don't care, you know, what I want is character, and all I get are these sort of cardboard, two-dimensional cutout characters. But that's kind of how characters work in a lot of genre. As it were, the phenomenology of character is different.
Yeah.
Where it's going to kind of detonate all at once. The whole point is to have a character as a type, as a recognizable version of a type. Either a type that you've read many times before, like, for instance, if you're reading a romance novel and there's the type of sort of like the kind of romantic main interest built on the model of Mr. Darcy in Pride and Prejudice. Somebody who seems like a grouchy, hostile, arrogant son of a bitch, but turns out to have a heart of gold, right? Well, that's a character type. And if you read romantic fiction, you will encounter versions of that type again and again and again. And you might say, well, this is so corny and played. These are stock types. But the whole point is it's to play on pleasurable recollection of that type, to do something perhaps elegant and new within the type. So, okay, now the Mr. Darcy character is going to be something like I don't know, let's imagine him in a different context. Now he's an elementary school teacher. Weird. That's a twist, right? And we're going to have to, but the thing is that the amusement that comes from that kind of literary move comes from the fact that you understand what the type is instantly. That it has an immediate apprehensibility.
I think there's also something interesting in sort of what there is in terms of like seeing a character who does embody an archetype, maybe to a degree that's intentional. You know, I think it's interesting. Jeeves is I think actually a very interesting character in this regard, because Jeeves has kind of become the Jungian archetype of the butler. And you kind of get the impression that Jeeves is someone who, again, he has to the degree any P.G. Wodehouse character does, he has a very rich inner life, but it serves him very well to play the role of the butler for Wooster, for all these other, you know, rich morons who kind of come to him for his help. It's made him very valuable, and you kind of pick up little hints throughout the Jeeves and Wooster stories that Jeeves has like a very kind of exciting and enjoyable life outside of his working hours. And he's doing fairly well for himself insofar as like a person who has to have like one of these sorts of jobs can in the time period he's living in. And I think that there's something to that. There's something to sort of the small amount of freedom and maybe power that you get by embodying an archetype in your kind of day-to-day life. Maybe I'm overstating things, but I do think there's something there.
Yeah, I'm detecting a little Carl Jung there, John.
I said Jungian, Ben. It was right there.
I mean, the Jeeves is interesting because he has there are different aspects of he does reflect a certain kind of archetype. And parts of that are more legible now, and some parts are less legible. Like, one part of that archetype is the sort of, well, to use a title of a short opera from the 18th century that has a small but important place in music history, La Serva Padrona, the servant as master. Serva Padrona is what is kind of widely hailed as a step on the path to Mozart's great comic operas, but it's on its own is absolutely just a piece of genre fiction, but in the 18th century. And the joke is that you have this wealthy, aging, like kind of middle-aged patron, this master who is outwitted at every turn by his low-born servant, who by the end of the play has contrived to get him to marry her. So now she's not the servant of the place, but the lady of the place. And this idea of the inversion of social roles, that's something that Jeeves embodies. But that context is, that's very much part of this sort of Jungian archetype of the clever servant, but perhaps has become a little bit less legible in our own time, where social class kind of breaks down a little bit differently, or it's legible in different contexts. I think what has ended up really appealing about the Jeeves archetype in the present day is his omnicompetence, his almost like James Bond-like omnicompetence, that he's the master of every situation. Anything that might happen, he is already on it. He's already seen it coming. You never catch him sleeping. He's kind of a badass from that point of view. And I think that's maybe the aspect of his character that, or the, again, to use that word, archetype, that really resonates in the present day.
Especially too, since compared to Wooster, who's kind of, like we were saying, kind of stuffed with a lot of like parlance of the times, but like he doesn't always apply it in the right situation, or sometimes he applies it in like a situation that makes it like unintentionally funny, as opposed to like Jeeves, where it's kind of like right time, always doing the right thing at the right time. Like there's kind of a nice like contrast there.
Yeah.
I mean, the two of them as a duo is the core of, I mean, there's a reason they're the Jeeves and Wooster stories.
Absolutely.
One could not really exist without the other. And I think that when there are tension in these stories, it's always kind of this romantic comedy tension where it's like something has gotten between the two of them. And what we're, the scariest outcome is that these two are split apart, because that means that there's no more stories to tell.
Well, and that's what the white dinner jacket is too. Like we were talking about that in the beginning. Like that's the thing that comes between the two of them.
Yeah, and I particularly love the scene where the jacket is revealed as an item of horror. Give me a yes. So yeah, this is early in the story, after like right around the time that Fink Noddle turns up on Jeeves and Wooster's doorstep in London, seeking advice from Jeeves about, he's fallen in love with Madeline Bassett and he's too nervous to talk to her. And here in this early stage, Jeeves and Wooster have a disagreement about this white mess jacket that Wooster had bought while at Cannes. The first intimation I had that things were about to hot up was a pained and disapproving cough from the neighborhood of the carpet. For during the above exchanges, I should explain, while I, having dried the frame, had been dressing in a leisurely manner, donning here a sock, there a shoe, and gradually climbing into the vest, the shirt, the tie, and the knee length, Jeeves had been down on the lower level, unpacking my effects. He now rose, holding a white object. At the sight of it, I realized that another of our domestic crises had arrived. Another of those unfortunate clashes of will between two strong men, and that Bertram, unless he remembered his fighting ancestors and stood up for his rights, was about to be put upon. I don't know if you were at Cannes this summer. If you were, you will recall that anyone with any pretensions to being the life and soul of the party was accustomed to attend binges at the casino in the ordinary evening wear trousering topped to the north by a white mess jacket with brass buttons. And ever since I had stepped aboard the blue train at Cannes station, I had been wondering on and off how mine would go with Jeeves. In the matter of evening costume, you see, Jeeves is hidebound and reactionary. I had had trouble with him before about soft bosom shirts, and while these mess jackets had, as I say, been all the rage, tout ce qu'il y a de chic on the Côte d'Azur, I had never concealed it from myself, even when treading the measure at the Palm Beach Casino in the one I had hastened to buy, that there might be something of an upheaval about it on my return. I prepared to be firm. Yes, Jeeves, I said. And though my voice was suave, a close observer in a position to watch my eyes would have noticed a steely glint. Nobody has a greater respect for Jeeves' intellect than I have, but this disposition of his to dictate to the hand that fed him had got, I felt, to be checked. This white mess jacket was very near to my heart, and I jolly well intended to fight for it with all the vim of grand old Sieur de Worcester at the Battle of Agincourt. Yes, Jeeves, I said. Something on your mind, Jeeves? I fear that you inadvertently left Cannes in the possession of a coat belonging to some other gentleman, sir. I switched on the steely a bit more. No, Jeeves, I said in a level tone. The object under advisement is mine. I bought it up there. You wore it, sir? Every night. But surely you were not proposing to wear it in England, sir. I saw that we had arrived at the nub. Yes, Jeeves. But, sir, you were saying, Jeeves? It is quite unsuitable, sir. And I'm sorry that I read much more than I intended to, but once I start reading this stuff, it's just like you just can't stop. It's just so absolutely delicious.
I mean, when you pick one of these books up, it's obviously it has your normal, chapter breaks, but it's very hard to put one of these down when you pick them up because the prose just carries you through it. You're always just going from one hilarious moment to the next, and you just kind of want to follow it all the way through. I completely agree with you there.
I especially love that bit that Wooster is calling on his family lineage fighting to defend this dinner jacket, again, playing up I am the master in this situation, but in sort of a comedic way because it's just a dinner jacket. So
again, the mock heroic side of it that Wooster treats very insignificant things as if they were matters of the highest honor, matters of life and death, and of course matters that really are of grave importance. Matters of marriage and love are treated as the merest nothings.
Yeah.
Everybody ends up happy at the end of every one of these novels, and yet it doesn't make any difference. Gussie Fink Nottle and Madeline Bassett eventually are engaged to be married, but somewhere in the course of all of these stories, they get unengaged, and Fink Nottle runs off with someone else, and Madeline Bassett runs off with someone else. And it's all of these things are temporary arrangements that ultimately don't matter for any purpose except to provide Jeeves and Wooster with hot water to get into and out of.
Yeah.
Well, I think Wodehouse is kind of an interesting figure. I'm struggling to think of exactly where I've heard this said before, but there's something very interesting about kind of these upper class British writers of sort of the inter and post war years, where they had kind of been bred to the manor born with sort of these pretensions of global empire, and then all of a sudden the empire falls apart, kind of in two of the most horrific conflagrations of violence in human history. And all of a sudden, they kind of don't have the purpose that they once did. The empire is now being managed by some corn-fed Yankees, and that they can't even keep a handle on India anymore.
Yeah.
And so there are different reactions to this. I've definitely heard of 007, which was brought up earlier, as kind of an attempt to sort of at least fantasize that the British were still in control of the whole world. I think that Jeeves and Wooster is maybe coping with a similar trauma, but in a very different way. It's kind of like, oh, well, none of this really matters, so I might as well, might as well find the fun in being an aristocrat in an empire that mostly does not do anything anymore.
Yeah, and I was looking into his biography, and apparently his parents left for I think either Hong Kong, sort of the consulate. They were diplomats abroad, and he didn't see his parents for 15 years. And so as a result, he got really into being at school, and he has a very strong attachment to his school days. And some people sort of read that into the novels as well. At school, you could have fun and learn, and it was never too serious. And that was kind of his family, which is one possible thing you could also bring to that as well. And I found the thing about his parents being gone for a while kind of interesting, because apparently that was just par for the course. If your family was upper level diplomats, of course they'd be abroad all the time or something like that.
Oh yeah, I mean my family on my mom's side is very much of that kind of world, or at least they were several generations back. And getting rid of your kids or was very, very much the done thing in that social class. My mom has never gotten over a certain feeling of resentment at having been packed off to boarding school at age 8. And for some people, that was a delightful experience. Clearly it was for Wodehouse, whose books, certainly his Jeeves and Wooster books, really play on the idea of the fantasy of being a parentless child with the entire world as your playground and with no meaningful authority figures to get in the way and spoil the fun.
Yeah, Wooster is someone. Oh, go ahead, Phil.
No, please.
I was going to say Wooster is someone. It's interesting. I feel like we only ever see aunts and uncles in terms of other Woosters, and they're people who can kind of wag their finger at him and say, "You really should clean up your act." But there's never anyone who can actually put any pressure on him, apart from Jeeves.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And Orwell, invoking Orwell's name actually allows me also to get to the other part of your remark, John. Orwell, also one of the bitterest things he ever wrote, maybe the bitterest thing he ever wrote, was an essay called Such Were the Joys, which is about his own experience as a boarding school child, much harassed and sat upon, and really kind of living a sad and depressing life. And that was an experience that many people actually had in this sort of class of person. It's always possible that Wodehouse was perhaps to some extent writing out of a sort of a pain of separation, although and this is a kind of a comic redemptive kind of take on what actually could be a very painful situation, although I don't presume to psychologize Wodehouse, about whom I know very little. I've never read a biography of his. Just something that popped in my mind. Orwell himself, by the way, wrote very, very feelingly about Wodehouse. He wrote a marvelous essay about Wodehouse Wodehouse got himself into a spot of trouble in World War II. He was swept up by the advancing German army at the onset of World War II. He was kept in, I think, a prison camp, but not one of the harsher ones. And then his condition was improved to house arrest. And there was some, military officer who was pretty friendly to him and was like, well, we can improve your situation if you just, say a few nice words on the radio. And so Wodehouse wrote one. Yeah. So he wrote a few of his like characteristically witty things where he talked mostly about how the Germans aren't so bad once you get to know them and blah, 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 which many English people considered a kind of treason. And so he was in hot water for these broadcasts. And Orwell's essay on him argues that Wodehouse was guilty really more of naivety than anything else.
Yeah, I pulled two quick quotes from that. One was that he called the broadcasts how to be an internee without previous training, which is very, very Wodehouse. And then two, one person said, the broadcasts, in point of fact, are neither anti nor pro-German, but just Wodehousian. He is a man singularly ill-fitted to live in a time of ideological conflict, having no feelings of hatred about anyone and no very strong views about anything. And then Orwell said, Wodehouse's moral outlook has remained that of a public school boy, and according to the public school code, treachery in time of war is the most unforgivable of all the sins. So yeah.
Well, and this is getting back to, something John was talking about, like the kind of social background against which Wodehouse's characters, particularly Jeeves and Worcester, take their place. And one point that Orwell makes in this essay is how Jeeves, or Worcester particularly, isn't really was already a stock character by the time he started writing these stories, already out of date, already something from outside, current events. This is a quote from Orwell's essay. Bertie Wooster, with his spats and cane, is the traditional stage Englishman, which is a great way of saying something we were saying earlier in this conversation, that he's a character type, a kind of character that you find in genre fiction, an immediately apprehensible type, a traditional stage Englishman. Conceived in 1917 or thereabouts, Bertie really belongs to an epoch earlier than that. A humorous writer is not obliged to keep up to date, and having struck one or two good veins, Wodehouse continued to exploit them with a regularity that was no doubt all the easier because he did not set foot in England during the 16 years that preceded his internment. He lived in the United States, I think particularly in New York for that time. His picture of English society had been formed before 1914, and it was a naive, traditional, and at bottom admiring picture. His books are aimed not obviously at a highbrow audience, but at an audience educated along traditional lines. In his radio interview with Flannery, Wodehouse wondered whether, quote, the kind of people and the kind of England I write about will live after the war, end quote, not realizing that they were ghosts already.
Wow.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't have the quote on hand, but I remember a quote from Wodehouse that I read after kind of reading my first story of his, where he says that he very deliberately chose to write books that he put them non-political books. That he really wanted to create a world kind of outside of that. I think probably because he had kind of been through this very scary experience. I mean, we can critique all we'd like, but none of us have ever been held in an internment camp before. So I don't want to judge too harshly. It is interesting. The first book of his that I read was the first Jeeves and Wooster novel, Thank You, Jeeves, which is the first, which I believe is the only one I know of that politics actually do intrude a little bit, because Jeeves quits to get married in that book, and Wooster accidentally hires a socialist butler who ends up being kind of a mad bomber type. And of course, nothing bad actually happens. The man is summarily captured by, I believe, the sort of futzy fat uncle in that book, which is different than the one in this book, because Wooster has a never-ending supply of futzy and chubby relatives. But yeah, I do think that some of this does put it kind of in a new light, where he was, yeah, kind of an outsider to England, and kind of developed this stage play version of it, because he didn't really know what was going on there. He was able to develop this comic version because he was not seeing what was actually happening on the ground.
Yeah, that's also interesting. Oh, go ahead, Phil.
I was just going to say, and what was happening on the ground wasn't necessarily that useful to him, because it didn't help him set up the jokes. Like I said, everything in these books is about the gags.
Well, I was going to say, I feel like and I obviously am not an expert on Victorian literature, but I feel like the characters who seem closest to me to Bertie are the main characters of The Importance of Being Earnest, which is a book that was written, at least 50, 60 years prior to this.
Yeah, where they're just kind of like, human foibles, upper class sort of, misunderstandings.
Just fucks, who really don't have any problems.
I also like Orwell's thing about how like a comic writer isn't obliged to be up to date, which I think is interesting, because I feel like now, there are, it's like sort of, I got to get my take in about the news, kind of like, at least with like mainstream satirical writing. And so it's interesting that Orwell kind of identifies that, like, a lot of why he can be funny is because he's not having to always like figure out where he is in relation to the current, whatever the current topic is or something, the current state of events.
Absolutely. I think one of my favorite sketch comedy shows of all time. It's not as well known as it should be these days. People have forgotten a bit about it. It's a show called SCTV. It was a Canadian troupe of actors that included a lot of people who became famous: Eugene Levy, John Candy, Catherine O'Hara, and so on. So they were all young people in their 20s, in the late 70s, early 80s, when they were doing this show. And the concept of the show was that it was like just a program. Every show was like a programming day for a low budget cable satellite network. And so it allowed them to do TV parodies and movie parodies, commercial parodies, a lot of the same kinds of things. You see some of the same kinds of things in other sketch comedy shows, and their big competitor was Saturday Night Live. Of course, everybody remembers Saturday Night Live. SCTV is maybe a little bit more obscure now. I've always liked SCTV more, though. Partly, I find that those shows are rewatchable in a way that Saturday Night Live episodes from the same time aren't, because SNL was always about topical humor.
Yeah.
Everything is very much framed in terms of stuff that was happening right then. Whereas the fact that SCTV was committed to this kind of framing conceit of like programming day, where it just naturally meant that they were constantly doing parodies of like old movies, TV shows, and so on, celebrity parodies, means that the humor has kept much better. You actually end up being able to communicate in a sort of a not timeless way. I mean, comedy is more time-bound probably than most other forms of human expression. But there is that something in that sort of desire to remain a little bit outside of time that allows stuff like this to stay fresh. I mean, Wodehouse's Jeeves and Wooster stories still have a big readership. There's lots of people who really love these stories, even as a lot of the educational norms that underwrote a lot of the humor. We were talking earlier about like how the writing is just salted with casual references to the King James Bible and lines from Tennyson or whatever. A lot of people don't have that range of literary references in their hip pocket anymore. But these stories still appeal. The humor is still there for people. There is something about these stories that's built to last. I was curious to ask you guys if you had any hypotheses as to why this might be so. What is it about these stories that makes them so kind of evergreen?
That's interesting. Yeah, I have a theory about that, and I think that it really comes down to Jeeves and Wooster as characters. The power of just that duo. the fact that they play so well off each other. But I think that there's also something where for a modern audience, we talked a little bit about kind of the weird way that class distinctions have kind of gotten a lot muddier since these stories were written, especially in kind of an Anglo context. Mm-hmm. And I think that part of the reason these stories maybe play very well is that maybe more so than when these were written and they were kind of being received by an audience that maybe was coming more from a Wooster world, but had a knowledge of they had Jeeveses in their lives. I think that the modern reader, I know that there are times where I feel like Wooster and there are times where I feel like Jeeves. Kind of the way that maybe in kind of especially in the context of America, where we don't have this explicit class system, but we kind of have an informal class system that people...
A very strongly implicit class system.
Exactly. Yeah. I recently transitioned between jobs. I went from a job where I was working for... I was in management for a company that was essentially a call center. They did more than that, but that was kind of the big day-to-day thing, to working in administration for a university. I'm not going to get any more specific than that. But the transition from one of those to the other has been very noticeable. The sense of kind of constantly being at people's beck and call to not necessarily, again, I have work I still have to do every day, but it's much more kind of at my own pace. It's much more kind of self-directed. Mm-hmm. And, I think that that's a very normal experience in America. You kind of go from working these shit jobs to kind of entering, some kind of a middle-class status. And all of a sudden the world just looks completely different. And I think that kind of that flexibility in class, and at least in an American context, gives these stories a very interesting valence. Mm-hmm. I think there's kind of this kind of, I think that for me, I look at these and there's part of me that kind of is obviously I don't like class society to some degree, but I think that there's something for kind of explicit class society is portrayed in these books, kind of people understanding where they stand and being able to kind of find their niche within that. But I think kind of in the chaos of modern society, kind of being able to read yourself in both directions, I think makes these stories very interesting.
Yeah, and I think I would say there's an interesting Michael Chabon essay where he's sort of standing up for entertainment in terms of literature, where he's nowadays we're always worried about highbrow, lowbrow. And he's we should just be more into what's entertaining. And I think for the reasons John has mentioned with just that explanation, I think these stories still maintain a lot of entertainment, whether it's the portrayal of a class system where you can kind of find your situation versus just for me at least sort of how funny the sentences are, and I'll find myself just kind of chuckling, just low chuckle and then explosion of laughter depending on what the buildup is. And I think that's just a pleasurable reading experience. And I think in the essay, Chabon's not I'm not throwing this away. There's a lot of imagination and thought and construction that goes into making something really good and entertaining, and we shouldn't be afraid of lowbrow, highbrow. And I think a lot of the authors in his cohort were into incorporating genre fiction into literary fiction. So in some ways it's kind of him speaking for that cohort of writers. But I find that argument kind of compelling, especially as to why these are still really popular, despite being kind of in the halcyon days, so to speak. So
yeah, I mean I haven't read the Chabon piece that you're referring to, but when you start talking about entertainment, one thing you're talking about is a certain kind of craft and technique.
Yeah.
Because there's getting people to laugh. There's an art to that, but there's also kind of a science to it. Hearing comedians talk about what makes a good joke. How do you write a good joke? I just recently saw there's a big 4-hour 2-part documentary on Gary Shandling on HBO. I think it's called The Zen of Gary Shandling. Found it really fascinating because Shandling was such a craftsman. He was such a technician of the joke. And there's so many people talking about how he would always just be rewriting and rewriting and getting and there's some examples of it as well, getting closer to what is the most technically assured, the smoothest execution, the most maximally effective version of a joke. What's the smoothest way into it? What's the smoothest way out of it? This isn't about expression, and it's not about it is about a kind of expression, but like a sort of more sloppily expressionistic kind of aesthetic, where it's all about like kind of dumping out your feelings, putting your insides on the outside, or for that matter, attempting to do something very kind of Barton Fink like the character in Barton Fink, this very self-serious writer who wants to write novels about society. It isn't about that either. It isn't about trying to use the novel as a canvas on which to paint a vast, intricate picture of all the interlocking gears of our society. It's about something smaller, more modest, but something that is deeply satisfying and often overlooked in the more kind of serious and grandiose kinds of art that I've just described, which is, as I say, the smooth, technically assured execution of the expected design. And thereby finding moments of originality within the expected. Where genre can become, or entertainment can become, a place for the stage managing of little surprises, like a little gift wrapped present that's handed to you, and you open it up and you find some little surprise there. You're not going to find, a picture of capitalist modernity in there. You're not going to see, my guts in there. What you're going to find is a perfectly plotted and executed gag. And there's something deeply satisfying about that, and the kind of thing that I think does keep these stories fresh.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. I feel like modern genre fiction is always kind of like pulled between these kind of weird. There's always this desire to be subverting expectations,
right?
But sometimes like that also can very easily lose why you're coming there in the first place. And I think that I think that's kind of why I find a lot of modern genre fiction falls a little bit flat for me. For instance, I think I've been a longtime hater of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I think that a big part of it is because they are trying to subvert the expectation of what is, or at least they started off kind of trying to subvert the expectation of what a superhero movie looked like. They wanted everything to look kind of plausible, but in doing that, they just made it boring. And I think that there's different, permutations of that. But that's just, I think, probably one of the most obvious ones. But I think that I agree with you, Phil. I think that there's an appreciation for like the craft of comic writing in this that just really shines, and that I think a lot of writers just never get the chance to develop this level of craft because the demands of kind of the modern market don't allow for it, let alone, again, who still has this level of education to kind of throw in all these little hits the way that Wodehouse does. I listened to you guys' a recent episode on memorization, and I really, really enjoyed it. And I think that there's something that definitely has been lost in terms of just the way that we don't kind of have the canon like on hand to us the way we, people used to as kind of writers and creators. The way we can't just kind of, call up snippets of the King James Bible or something like that. And I think that is something in these stories that I really appreciate, and that, I wish we could see a little more of in contemporary writing.
Yeah, and also like the phrase like we're gonna do this genre right, like that's always an alarm bell for me. Anytime I see anybody saying like we're gonna correct the wrongs of cowboy fiction, it's like I feel like that's the wrong energy. Like sure you can do that, but if you're going into it with that like kind of correcting whatever, it's like I mean maybe you're not
zeal.
Right, exactly. Yeah, like I mean, it doesn't mean you can't do good stuff doing that, but I feel like we were saying, there's kind of a nice version of like knowing what the form is and then changing it within, as opposed to like, subverting it all over.
Well, subversion is, of course, a really important part of the moves you can make in genre fiction, but there's like more or less elegant ways to do it. One example, actually, I often use this when I'm teaching undergraduate music history here at Indiana University, when I want to talk about the moves that a composer can make in the genre space of like the 19th century sonata, for example. I'll talk about James Bond, which I've already name-checked in our conversation. And I think about the first Daniel Craig James Bond movie was Casino Royale. And with that one, they were rebooting the whole franchise, which had become rather stale. And they wanted to establish 007 as having, if not, being gritty, at least grittier, having a little bit of danger and a kind of rough aggressiveness to him that had been missing from the sort of Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton sort of versions of 007. And so Casino Royale was a really logical place for them to start, because that's Bond before he's 007. This is before he has a license to kill. And so the whole premise of the film is, this is James Bond, but this is a little bit before he becomes who he would become, the classic James Bond we all remember. And so one way that within the template of a James Bond genre fiction piece, they managed to convey that. They use the genre norms to convey the sense that he's not quite who he's going to become. He's still a bit rough around the edges. There's a scene where the Daniel Craig Bond orders a martini and the bartender asks him if he would like it shaken or stirred. And Bond says something like, "Do I look like the kind of man who cares whether it's shaken or stirred?" Lol.
And then he goes, it's quite good. Like he surprises himself, like how good the cocktail is. He's like, oh wow, I got something there. Like,
So like if we're thinking about this as one of those saint affairs, sort of like Sherlock Holmes having his moment at the beginning of every story where he could show us what he can do with his deductive reasoning powers. We think of this as a similar moment, the moment where we get to hear James Bond say shaken, not stirred. And in that moment, we have a little subversion, a little inversion of the expectation. Instead of telling us, we all know how he likes his martini, instead, he says he doesn't care, but that inversion of the expected generic saint affair itself is doing some kind of work. It's very elegant. It's telling us something about the character. Now that's the kind of elegant movement within genre space that Wodehouse excels at. The kind of stuff that you're talking about, I find tiresome as well. Marvel Cinematic Universe, I've tried to shut out from my consciousness. Mostly my acquaintance with it comes from sitting on airplane flights and seeing the person next to me watching one of those movies. And because so I experienced the movie just watching it without sound. And let me tell you, however stupid those movies might be when you see them in the theater, they're so much stupider if you see them just with subtitles and otherwise completely in silence. So the weaknesses of the films become particularly apparent under those circumstances. But in any event, if you say, oh, well, we're going to get cowboy movies right, we're going to get superhero movies right, the level of subversion you're attempting is really almost a kind of on the level of society itself. It's not something that you're managing within genre space. What you're trying to do is simply to re-engineer the entirety of the genre space and the space that holds it, which is to say our social expectations. That is way more ambitious, and it is frankly hubristic. And there's something annoying about it because it suggests that the producers who make these things are able to tell us what we should enjoy.
Yeah. And too, like, there's a rhetorician who has a nice definition of genre, Carolyn Miller. It's called, she just refers to it as social action, like the idea that it's a sort of collection of things that a group or a society has decided is like something important or worth doing or emulating. So yeah, to kind of undo it is to say, like, you guys are all wrong about this. Like, you've all been doing this wrong, and I actually know what's, you know, the correct social action we should do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I think that there's something to it too, where I think now, because we've just, subversion has almost become kind of the dominant mode of genre fiction.
Yeah.
Nobody's actually referring to anything anymore. Everyone's just deconstructing constantly. But again, there's no respect for like a prior canon.
Yeah.
And there's no, you know, I've just read Adorno's essay on the culture industry this last week for a reading group I'm in. And, you know, he makes a lot of kind of the way that culture is flattened in the time period he's talking about. And I don't totally agree with that essay, because I think the stuff he's talking about, you know, you see, you know, he talks a lot about the Hays Code and kind of the way all movies are the same. But in doing that, he misses the small ways that artists were rebelling against that, you know, in a lot of those, you know, movies of the time. And I think that the fact that now just everyone's trying to subvert without like actually having a dominant paradigm that they're working against just makes everything feel so groundless.
Yeah. Yeah. Subversion kind of works aesthetically when you have a clear sense of what it is you're inverting, and where that thing that you're inverting still has some emotional claim on you. But if you say, well, other versions of this were, you know, politically or socially problematic, or they're not relevant to us, or I'm chucking it all away, you know, this isn't your parents' superhero movie or whatever, then that's actually a very disrespectful relationship to the tradition that you find yourself in. Subversion doesn't just mean throwing it out. It implies a sort of productive tension with the tradition. If you simply think that tradition itself is wrong or bad or not something that has any real claim on your creative efforts in the present day, then there's no creative tension with it. Even, you know, getting back to SCTV, like a lot of their parodies of movies and celebrities and so on are not especially affectionate. Their version of, like, for example, the kind of the Rat Pack characters, the sort of like the
Frank Sinatra,
Bobby Bittman, the horrible hacky nightclub comedian.
His name Bittman is awesome. Bobby Bittman. That's pretty all great.
But you know, I wouldn't feel great if I was the person who was being parodied there. That would feel unfriendly. But at the same time, it's closely observed. It's funny because it's true, or at least it captures some large element of truth. If your idea of subversion is of like total replacement with existing tropes with new ones you just invented, then that tension just goes slack.
Yeah.
You know, I wonder if kind of bringing us back to Jeeves and Wooster, I wonder if part of the reason these stories do endure, you know, even if it's in a relatively small way, and I think they have, and I think that they probably will continue to in the future. At least, you know, I think people are going to keep watching the Stephen Fry and Hugh Laurie adaptations and reading the books. You know,
those are very good.
But I wonder if part of it is that these stories feel in a very strange way, like in this kind of age where, you know, we're talking a lot about subversion. We're also living in an age where, again, everything's a remake and a sequel. These don't feel like stories that could be picked up and someone could be like, we're going to do Jeeves and Wooster right this time. You know, they feel very both, you know, timeless, but also kind of sufficient.
Yeah.
There's no, I feel like adding anything would spoil the balance, or subtracting anything. Like, it's very like they're very calibrated. Yeah, I guess is how I would.
Of course, that never dissuaded anybody from making remakes of like Conan the Barbarian or The Taking of Pelham 123 or Total Recall.
Or they're going to do,
I could just I could keep listing movies that were thoroughly ruined by people thinking they could recapture lightning in a bottle. Sorry, you were going to say, Ben.
Just the most recent one was the Possession remake, and I'm like, come on, like that would be, that's like a one. I feel like the Possession is like lightning in a bottle, and now they're gonna remake it with like what Robert Pattinson, and I'm like, this is just gonna be bad. So, but
yeah, I don't know if there's something about Jeeves and Wooster that makes it less appealing to the kind of people who want to strip mine old properties in the way that we've described, or whether there's something in I don't know whether it's that the stuff doesn't seem like it offers enough value to people who like to do that sort of thing, or if it's simply there's something in the material that is resistant to that. I don't know. But I will say, long may that state of affairs remain. I do not want to wake up one day and find that like Ryan Johnson has been attached to some blockbuster.
Oh God!
Jeeves and Wooster movie.
Yeah, it's like a murder mystery or something. Yeah, Glass Onion 3. Yeah,
that's Jeeves. What it would be. That's exactly what it would be. Oh, man.
I mean, I think we're safe from that from the standpoint that no one just makes comedies anymore. They always have to have some extra layer on top of them of either like genre or like social relevance. No one can just make a movie that's funny anymore. No one wants to make that. I guess because it's too hard.
Yeah, craft has been lost. So, yeah.
Well, you're reminding me of a favorite musical comedy, The Bandwagon. We on our show, JF and I once did a show on the psychedelic horror film Mandy and The Bandwagon, basically because JF loves horror. I love film musicals, and the price of me watching Mandy was I forced him to watch The Bandwagon, a 1953 Fred Astaire movie. And it was like this completely random pairing, The Mandwagon, as we've come to call it. That is actually one of my favorite episodes. But
it's a great episode.
Like it worked better than you would think it did. In The Bandwagon, there's this Orson Welles like very pompous, very grandiose theatrical impresario named Jeffrey Cordova, and the story of the film is basically this washed up song and dance man played by Fred Astaire and his friends who are screenwriters come up with the idea for a comeback vehicle that's going to be a fun singing and dancing picture about a guy who sells out. He writes children's books, but to make some money, he writes a lurid pot boiler, and he feels like he sold his soul to the devil. Well, Cordova hears about it, and he decides this is going to be a film about Faust. And he turns it into this intolerably pompous, pretentious, overwrought film. And he's so excited about his idea when he's telling them what he's going to do. He's like, it's going to be a picture with stature and meaning. And he just won't allow a comedy to be a comedy. And the whole arc of the film, and of course it all ends happily, is that they have to make this absolute turkey of a show, a bomb of a show, which is very serious and high-minded and nobody wants to see. And they can only turn it around when they get back to their comedy roots and they put on a show with gags and gals, just fun genre entertainment. And this is, and it's funny because this kind of stuff happened all the time in the 40s and 50s, and it is happening a lot now where you can just see producers being like, yeah, you can't just be funny. It's just like what John was saying. Can't just be funny. We could do a comedy, but it has to have stature and meaning. And
yeah,
which means that you can't have comedy.
Yeah, and that's also what's so interesting about Wodehouse being that quote saying that he is completely non-ideological. Like he neither hates someone or like has strong feelings, which like is an interesting, like, I don't know if I'm willing to say like that's what we should all be doing now, but it's certainly like an interesting approach to kind of be like, yeah, he's somewhat outside of it so that he doesn't have to like, yeah, these don't have to mean something. They can just be like what they are, as opposed to like presenting it as opposed to, yeah, like, I don't know, a commentary on X or something like that. So
one of many reasons that I love Wodehouse.
Ben, I think as someone who has struggled with this in their own kind of creative work, I think maybe the idea is maybe less to be completely non-ideological, but not to let your ideology define your work. You know, if you're trying to write a good mystery story, write a good mystery and let your ideological commitments, if you have any, you know, kind of come out in the background. Don't necessarily front and center them. Like you're some kind of socialist realist, because you're going to make boring work that way, probably, like a lot of the socialist realists did, for better or worse.
Yeah, that reminds me of a lot of Gilbert Sorrentino's fiction is making fun of these kinds of people. Like one of his books, Mulligan Stew, is about a new wave mystery writer who writes like incredibly horrific prose that like Sorrentino like forces you to read to understand that like you should not try to be combining these kinds of things like in this way. But yeah, like social realist mystery. It sounds like a little too many ingredients in the stew.
I ain't reading that book.
All right.
Any final thoughts and or plugs, Phil, if you need to plug anything?
No, I have a podcast, but fuck, everybody has a podcast. So you could probably figure that out on general principles.
I think a lot of our audience came to the show by me posting about it in the Weird Studies subreddit. So
nice.
A couple of our early episodes I thought would play well to that crowd. So I think there's probably some overlap there. But if you're new, definitely give Weird Studies a listen. I think it's easy to say one of the shows that really inspired Ben and I to start this one. Phil is always great on there, as is JF, who is not here. But yeah, read PG Wodehouse. Absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for recommending this, Phil, because I hadn't read any PG Wodehouse and thoroughly enjoyable. I'm going to definitely try to read more in the future.
Oh, it makes me happy that I introduced you to such a great writer.
Well, I personally don't have anything else to say. As always, listeners, you know where to find the show on all the various social media platforms. We'll talk to you here in a couple weeks. Until then, Semper Books.
Semper Books.
Thank you for listening to The Infinite Library. If you liked our show, we hope you'll subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or the podcast app of your choice. It helps us a lot. If you want to follow us on social media, we can be found on Twitter, Instagram, and Blue Sky at Infinite Library Pod. If you'd like to contact our team directly with episode ideas or feedback, you can email us at infinitelibrarypod@gmail.com. Our intro music is by Amos Legend in the Forest of Mayhem. Our outro music is by DJ Daggy Diggs, and our logo was created by Lars Noir. You can support our show by supporting them. We hope you'll join us back in the stacks for the next episode soon. Semper Books, bookheads.